It's a pleasure having you, Professor Harari, with us. I wanted to start by asking you a question I think everyone is thinking about at this time. In 2050, are we all going to be useless?
No, not everyone. As I said, there will be new jobs. There will be things to do. The really big problem is the problem of retraining and reinventing and adapting to the new conditions. And this is not a problem we can postpone to 2050 because it's an urgent issue today in education. What do you teach kids today in school that will still be relevant in 2050? There is a serious fear that much of what we are teaching kids today will be irrelevant, and we don't know what to teach them instead.
You've spoken earlier about school having reality maps. Reality maps for the future. Can you elaborate a little? For instance, a school today in 2018 is looking ahead. You know, there is a child in class 1, is looking ahead to the next 12 years, the next 16 years of studies. What is it in terms of a reality map that they should look at?
Well, nobody knows how the job market will actually look like in 30 years, which is an unprecedented situation in history. We were never before in a situation when parents and children, parents and teachers look forward such a short time and they say, we just don't know what you kids will need to do in order to have a job and be fruitful members of society. So our best bet is to focus on emotional intelligence and on mental resilience. Because the one thing we know for sure that people will need is the ability to keep learning and keep changing themselves throughout their lives.
What is very interesting is that you spoke about how artificial intelligence is pretty much the way to go. Not that it will take over, but that's going to be a very dominating force in the coming future. And when we speak of artificial intelligence, software engineers come into play. Now, software engineers are the people who are going to be most looked at because these are the people who are going to be developing these technologies. But at the same time, these are men and women trained to design, not trained to philosophically guide our future. So, for instance, if there was a software engineer today, and you could have 5 things to tell him in his profession, what would those 5 things be?
Well, we don't have much time, so let's start with one. The first thing is the absolute need to incorporate an ethical training into the career or the teaching of software engineers. I mean, of all the people today in the world, the ones that need most ethical training is software engineers, even more than lawyers or judges, because they shape the world, and they can and they need to do it responsibly. I'll give an example. More and more, even today, the question of discrimination turns out to be a question of computer designing. If we want to fight against discrimination of women, discrimination of ethnic minorities, discrimination of gays and lesbians, then we need to think in terms of how do we design software. When people today apply for a job, to apply to a bank, to get a loan, more and more often their application is processed by an algorithm, not by a human being. So we need to ensure that the algorithm doesn't discriminate against particular people. For instance, there were cases in the United States that, of course, you know that you shouldn't code an algorithm with racial discrimination, to discriminate against black people. But what happened is that the algorithm started to discriminate against people from particular postcodes, particular neighborhoods. And all the people from that neighborhood were black. And the people didn't realize that this was actually racial discrimination in disguise. So if we want to fight against discrimination, the front line now is with these algorithms. I mean, you apply to the bank to get a loan, and the bank tell you, no, we don't give you a loan. Why not, you ask? And the bank replies, we don't know. The algorithm said, don't give this person a loan. And we don't understand why the algorithm decided that. We trust our algorithm. The algorithm goes over enormous amounts of data, especially personal data, and finds patterns of people, reliable people and unreliable people. And based on that, the algorithm decides whom to give a loan to. And we can't understand how the algorithm is doing it. If we could, we wouldn't have needed the algorithm. So these questions of discrimination, now they actually are decided by the people who designed the algorithms. So they need a good training in ethics to beware of, for example, discriminating against particular groups.
But interestingly, organisms are algorithms, and algorithms can be hacked. So at the end of the day, is it a catch-22 situation? Because we are, even if you train these software engineers, but at the end of the day, if we are living in such a predictable manner that they can be hacked, is it game over?
No, I mean, it can be used. I focused on the dangers of these technologies. But actually, there are huge advantages also. If you think about something like traffic accidents, then today in the world, every year, more than 1 million people are killed in traffic accidents. That's more than the people killed in all the wars together. And the vast majority of traffic accidents are caused by human errors. Somebody drinking alcohol and driving, somebody falling asleep, things like that. If we replace human drivers with self-driving vehicles, we could save 1 million people every year. This is a wonderful thing. Similarly, even if you think about discrimination, then there are things you can do with computers which are far easier than with people. I mean, you can tell managers and bankers and officials that it is wrong to discriminate against women, against gays and lesbians, against black people. And they can even agree with you. But at the end of the day, there is something more stronger than their intellectual understanding, which is their subconscious, their deep feelings and biases. So even somebody would say, yes, it's wrong to discriminate against women, against black people. When he actually comes to make a decision who to hire for the job, he will discriminate because of his subconscious biases. Most of what's happening in our minds, we are not aware of. With computers, the great thing is they don't have a subconscious. Whatever you code the computer to do, this is what it will do. So if you code it in the right way, it's much easier to fight against computer discrimination than against human discrimination. We always needed philosophers and spiritual guides, but I think, yes, we need them today more than ever before because we are more powerful than ever before, and because technology is turning philosophical questions into practical questions of engineering. It's really quite an amazing time today to be a philosopher.
You do write that the liberal story is losing the fight. Mm-hmm. That the liberal story, which it sort of gained in the past, is now seemingly losing out. And very interestingly, you said that countries like India and Brazil that actually did sort of adopt liberal economic policies really grew. A lot of nations which didn't follow. But what I did want to sort of point out that in terms of liberalism, when you look at economic policies, for sure, countries are growing. But what about liberal social policies? Mm-hmm. A lot of people in India today would say that our current government isn't all that liberal. Mm-hmm. So is it just about being liberal economically, or it is, you've got to go the whole hog?
No. Liberalism, I mean, the liberal story is much, much broader than just economics. Now, having said that, yes, now the liberal story is in crisis, and the biggest crisis of all is that there is nothing to replace it. Humans are animals, are storytelling animals. We think in stories. To understand the world, we need a story. In the 20th century, we had 3 stories, big stories about the world. The communist story, the fascist story, the liberal story. And fascism and then liberalism and then communism collapsed, and only liberalism remained as the single story explaining everything. And in the last few years, it is also collapsing, and people have lost faith in it. And there is nothing to fill the vacuum. What you see with the populist regimes that are arising in different countries around the world, they don't have any vision for the future. What they sell people is nostalgic fantasies about the past, about some imaginary past that we can somehow go back to, which is impossible. And I think the most severe problem of the political system today in all the world is that nobody can come up with a meaningful vision for the future for where humankind will be in 30 or 40 years. A vision that addresses issues like global warming on the one hand, and AI and biotechnology and genetic engineering on the other hand. You just don't have anybody that provides a guidance on that. And the populist regimes with their nostalgic fantasies, they can sustain themselves for a few years. But in the long run, unless we can find some new vision, meaningful vision for the future, then we are heading towards chaos and extremism.
So, in the current scenario, every person who is a voter and is now looking at whether it's a local government, his or her national government, when they now need policies to somewhat get a framework for the future, what advice would you give to voters around the world?
Yeah.
That when a politician comes to you asking for your vote, this is the key question. This is what you must demand. What should that be?
Well, of course, for every country, there are different local issues which are very important. But over and above that, 3 or 4 questions to ask every politician all over the world is, if I elect you, if I vote for you, what will you do to lessen the danger of nuclear war? What will you do to lessen the danger of climate change? And what will you do to regulate the explosive potential of artificial intelligence and bioengineering? And finally, what is your vision for humanity in 2050? What is your worst case scenario that you're most afraid of? And what is your best case scenario? If we learn how to make use of all these enormous new powers, what will be the best case scenario? And if the politician has no good answer, or if the politician just keeps talking about the past and has nothing meaningful to say about the future, don't vote for that particular politician.
You know, when you speak about violence in your lecture, you refer to that it just takes one fool, one idiot to start that war.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But in the current world scenario, do you see more than one idiot, couple?
I'm not in a position to comment on the intelligence and mental balance of leaders whom I haven't met. But you certainly see that leaders are becoming far more reckless and far less responsible in their behavior. And again, what we talked about earlier, becoming far more isolationists and nationalists, basically saying we care only about what happens to our nation. We relinquish responsibility for the rest of the world and for the impact of our nation on the rest of the world. And this is extremely irresponsible because in the reality of the 21st century, the idea of independent nations is simply a fantasy. There are no independent nations anymore. All nations depend on one another. When it comes to nuclear war, as long as a continental ballistic missile can travel between the USA and Russia within minutes. So there is no independent nation in such a scenario. Similarly with climate change, similarly with the rise of AI and with bioengineering, no nation is independent.
I think this is a really good time to open the floor for questions from the audience. I do wish we could put you in a room with world leaders and talk to them, but I don't think they're that lucky, but this audience is. So here, the gentleman here in the black.
In your books, you've talked about the propensity of human beings to indulge in myth-making of different kinds. And I wanted to know, what do you think are the most dangerous myths of our generation?
Okay, the two most dangerous myths, the question was what was the most dangerous myth of our generation? And I think there are two of them, opposite ones. One dangerous myth is the myth of nostalgic fantasy, which I just talked about. The idea that there was some golden age in the past and that we can somehow go back there. And this is a very dangerous myth. I'm a historian. What I can tell you about the past wasn't fun. You wouldn't really want to go back there. And even if you wanted to, it's impossible. So when you direct the attention of people towards this fantasy, instead of working to create a better future, that is a very dangerous thing to do. The opposite dangerous myth is technological utopia. The idea that we just need to develop better technology and this will solve everything. And it never solves everything. Again, each technology can be used in many different ways. And if you invest only in technological progress without investing at least as much in the education of humans and in the cultivation of human compassion and human empathy, then people will do terrible things with the new technology. It will just make them more powerful. So these are the two dangerous myths of our time.
There at the back, the gentleman, the white T-shirt.
What I inferred from reading Sapiens in the start was that Sapiens as a species has destroyed other species around us. Mainly our planet, what it is today is because of our race. This is something I inferred. And the second thing I inferred was that we are prisoners to our own constructs. What I wanted to ask you is, there was a big ethical uproar on gene editing and what happened in China over CRISPR. What are your thoughts on this topic? And what I'm getting to is that since we are a species that has messed up our planet in a way, what is so bad in making a better species?
Well, in theory, it would be a good idea to create better humans. I just don't think that genetic engineering is the way to do it, at least not for now, because we know so little about the human body, the human brain, the human mind, that this is just what I was referring to in the lecture, that we know how to manipulate things long before we have a deep and round understanding of the system we are manipulating. So it happens again and again in history. We try to improve something, but because we don't really understand the consequences of what we are doing, it leads to unintended, terrible consequences. And if we start doing it to our bodies, to our brains, it's very likely that we will try to improve certain human qualities, which I think are very important, but inadvertently, we will change other things. To give an example from a recent study, there is a biochemical called oxytocin, which became famous as the biochemical of love, because a lot of research showed that oxytocin plays a key role in forming the bond between mothers and children, between family members, between romantic lovers, in relationships. So people had the idea, wonderful. We now found the key to love and harmony in the world. All we need to do is spray oxytocin in the air and put oxytocin in the drinking water, and we'll have world peace and global harmony. But then future researchers showed that actually the same biochemical that causes greater love towards people you know also simultaneously causes hatred and animosity towards strangers.
It teaches you to love your own and hate the ones outside.
Exactly, yeah.
The lady in the front,
Just want to ask you that you spoke about hacking humans, and you also said in the beginning of your talk that how we are more at risk of killing ourselves than being killed in a war. Taking that further, today we all know that depression and faulty thinking or erroneous thinking is a big epidemic that the world is fighting against. So how do you think technology can help in psychological manipulation of human beings for betterment, not necessarily as a damaging factor?
Well, it can help in many things. Again, there are dystopian visions involved with this technology. But to speak on the bright side, technology can help us diagnose mental disorders and mental diseases on a massive scale. One of the big problems with mental health care is that it's very expensive. It's often much more expensive than typical health care. And there are billions of people on the earth that don't have any mental health care system to support them. And computers and mobile phones even can be used at least to diagnose things like depression far more cheaply and efficiently than anything we have today. Your smartphone can be monitoring your behavior, not what is happening inside your body, your blood pressure, your brain activity, and also what you do or what you search online. Today, even Google has new applications that try to diagnose things like depression or stress simply by monitoring the words you're searching online. And the one question that, Google says, any question you ask us, we answer. There is one question that when you type it in Google, at least in Israel, I don't know in India, when you type, you don't get the answer. The question is how to kill myself, how to commit suicide.
True.
Instead of telling you how to do it, it gives you the number of a kind of hotline for mental health care. So again, it can go in terrible ways also. True. I don't want to praise it too much. But think of a situation when your mobile phone, maybe say you're a parent and you have a teenage daughter and she's depressed and you don't even know it, but the mobile phone alerts you that your daughter is in severe depression. So this is especially important for people, for classes, for countries that cannot provide good mental health care of the kind that we see in the rich countries today.
sadly, tonight we don't have any more time. One last question.
A book like Sapiens and a book like 21 Lessons, which deals with a multidimensional approach to concepts and complex matters. How do you go about writing those? Could you tell us a bit about your process as an author?
Give your secrets away tonight.
Yeah, well, much of it is actually written in conversations like the one we are having now. All my 3 books were written in conversation. The first book, Sapiens, was written in conversation with my students at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I was teaching a course about the history of the world for something like 10 years, and this gave me the ability to experiment with ideas, to hear what the students are most interested in. If something was boring or if they didn't understand something, then I realized I had to learn more and to explain it maybe in a different way.
I think we'll never have enough time with Professor Harari.
Thank you
so much.